Hello there. This is the first video I've done where I'm actually in the video. This is going to be a ranking video, and I decided that because there's not a whole lot of ranking videos on this group, that I would do Tangerine Dream. Now Tangerine Dream did like over 100 albums, but I'm only going to rate the ones basically during the Franke era. Well, plus the first album, which didn't have him in it, which runs from about 1970 to about 1987. And this is when Tangerine Dream was at their most experimental and had the long ambient songs and stuff, or tracks. And I just thought I'd go with those, of which there's like, I don't know, 17 was it? Okay, from my least favorite to my favorite, I've got all these. I've listened to a lot more than what I'm ranking here, but these are the ones I have. My first one, least favorite, is Tiger. Tiger, I don't know. It's the really the third one that I've got on here that had vocals in it, but there was something about this one that just didn't have the normal mood of a Tangerine Dream album. It did have a couple long tracks, but it just wasn't the same as their usual stuff that what I buy Tangerine Dream for. My next one, Le Parc, second to least favorite. This one here, oh, I didn't mention though, I'm not doing the soundtracks, but this one here is very much similar to one of the soundtrack videos. It's got 9 short pieces, the longest one being about 6 minutes, and it's basically just, it's almost easy listening. Like Tiger, it doesn't really have the mood of what I'm used to seeing as Tangerine Dream. So yeah, this is the second to least favorite. Next one, Exit. Now, from here on, these are all pretty good in my opinion. This one here, it's got a couple long tracks on it. It's a little more, maybe a little more poppy than some of their earlier stuff. And I do like the album, but it just doesn't quite go through the long. It does, definitely looks more, sounds more it sounds more like it was intentionally written rather than the long ambient stuff that they're used to do, that they've done in their earlier days. Okay, this one, Logos, it's a live album. Now, some of these live albums in their later period, although they did do a lot of improv and stuff, they tend to meander a little more than a lot of their earlier works. It's a good album. It's got 2 long parts and then a little short piece called Logos at the end. Definitely worth having if you're a Tangerine Dream fan, but it's the third one down. The next one is Electronic Meditation. This is their first one, which I actually have on LP. This is their first album. This is the one that doesn't have Franke in it. It is very experimental. There's only slight hints of their long sequencer pieces that they became known for later. There's almost no electronic instruments. It's got regular instruments, guitars, flutes, and different things, an organ. It's actually a pretty decent album, but it is highly experimental. It definitely is an acquired taste, and most people who like Tangerine Dream's period where they really got melodic would probably not care as much for this one, but I do like it. Pergamon, this is the second live one that I've got on my list. Came out 1980. There's a couple different versions of it. It's sometimes it's released under the name Quick Hot, and sometimes it's released under the name Pergamon. But either one is the same exact album. There's no difference between either of the two. This one has a lot of guitar in the second part, especially in the second part. It's a pretty good live album, but it does have a lot of long stretches in it without as many changes as some of their earlier stuff. Next one is Live Miles. This is the last album. This is actually the last album, the newest album on my list. Came out in 1988. The last one that Franke was in. And it's a pretty good live album. It's better than the other two. It's not quite as good as the earlier ones. It is just basically two long sections, which is pretty good. White Eagle's next. Now, White Eagle and the next one I'm putting on here is the last two that really, studio albums for a while at least, that had anything sidelong on the album. And this one here, it's Mojave Plain. It's a pretty good album. It's a little more modern, than the other ones. It came out in '82, and its production values are a little different than their first ones, their earlier ones. It's decent, but not quite up to their earlier standards, and that's why it's down here. Hyperborea is actually quite a bit better than the one preceded it. This came out right after. It came out in 1983. Again, it has a sidelong piece and several shorter pieces. There's one piece called Cinnamon Road that's pretty interesting. It's less than 4 minutes long. And Sphinx Lightning, which is the sidelong track, is pretty good. Underwater Sunlight. This came out in 1984. This is probably the last one they did that I really dig, studio-wise, that I really dig. It's got two fairly long pieces on side one, and side two is more shorter pieces. And the shorter pieces are more disciplined, and there again, I like Tangerine Dream when they do their improvisation style and their ambient stuff. But this is still a pretty good album. This one, Green Desert. Now, this was actually put together in their earliest period, but it didn't see the light of day till 1986. And by the time it came out, they had actually added some instrumentation to it, so it sounds a lot different than it probably did when it was first put together. And this one only has Edgar Froese and Franke on it. It also has a side-long piece, which most of the earlier ones do. It's not quite up to par with the earlier ones of the same period, but it's still definitely worth a listen. Poland. This is an excellent live album. It's got 5 tracks on it. 2 of the tracks are over 20 minutes, and then a third one's almost 20 minutes long, and one's 15 minutes long. They do get to stretch their creative legs here. It goes through a lot of changes, even in single songs. It goes through a lot of changes. It's a really good. This is definitely one of the good later live albums to get. Next is Cyclone. Now, Cyclone is pretty interesting. This is actually the first one they did that has lyrics on it. And like I said, there's only like 3 that has any vocals, on it at all. Side 1 of it has 2 tracks that have lyrics in it, and side 2 is an instrumental, very much like the rest of the Tangerine Dream stuff from that period. This came out in 1978. It is quite a good album. The vocals are not bad at all on it as far as taken away from the music. The first piece, Bent Cold Sidewalk, has a pretty long stretch of instrumental stuff within it, even though it's vocal. Rising Runner Missed by Endless Sender is just a straightforward song. It doesn't have any of the Tangerine Dream stuff that you're used to hearing. It's just a song. And the last one on side 2 of the album, Madrigal Meridian, is very much like the old Tangerine Dream. It's good. It's really good. Alpha Centauri, which I also have on vinyl. It's still pretty experimental. But it does definitely move towards the sound of the early Virgin sound. It's pretty good. Side 1 has a short track at the beginning, and then it's got the Fly and Collision of Cosmos Solar, which finishes up the side, and then Alpha Centauri is a side-long track. Side 2, the side-long track, is pretty meditative. It's really slow, very, very moody, and it's a pretty good album, but it's a little bit more experimental than their prime period. Adam is the very next album after Alpha Centauri. I have a copy of this, but it's actually a double album with Alpha Centauri, but that's what it would have looked like on album. This one is similar to Alpha Centauri, but it's very, very, it's got drums, it's just very, very, it rocks a little more. Especially the opening. The opening has got a pretty good drum opening to it. It's pretty good. And side 2 has 3 shorter songs, 2 of which I really like. The last one it's got a lot of voices making sounds, sort of like Pink Floyd's Power Talk H, but it's still definitely worth a listen. Tangram came out in 1980. This one is where people actually start to say that their sound changed a little bit, although to me it does have a lot of the qualities of the earlier work. And this is the last one I think that completely has one song with 2 parts. Its production's a little different, but it definitely has that same kind of long piece with several changes, and definitely a really good album. Ricochet came out in 75. This one here, it's a live album, but there was a lot of studio stuff added to it. If you ever get a hold of their bootleg sets, which is behind me up there, the little short there on CD, you can actually hear what this concert sounded like before they added the stuff to it. But the stuff they added to it does make it sound pretty good. It is a pretty good track. It very much sounds like a normal studio track. It's one piece with 2 songs on it. Or, well, 1 song, but 2 parts. Very melodic, and it's still got some experimentation. Very, very good. This is my favorite live album by Tangerine Dream, Logos. It's basically 4 pieces. Each one of the pieces, I also got this on that one. Still very experimental. All the songs are like less than 20 minutes, but the shortest one is still over 16 minutes. Lots of chances to improvise. There's a lot of guitar, especially in the 3rd track, Coldwater Canyon. There's a lot of guitar on it. There's all kinds of instruments. All these early ones, there was a period there where they were doing a lot of mixture of acoustic style instruments, traditional instruments, and synthesizers. Very, very, very good live album. Next one is Force Majeure. which I have on album. It's actually a clear record, a clear vinyl. This is really, really, really good. This one rocks more than probably any of the other studio albums. The title track, Force Majeure, is excellent. There's two shorter tracks on the back. All three of them are good. Probably my least favorite is the third track, Through Metamorphic Rocks, but it's still a good track. Excellent album. Next is Zeit. Zeit is their only studio double album. It's also got that on vinyl. It is a highly experimental album. It doesn't really have any rhythms or anything. It's very, very, very ambient. In fact, side one is the closest to being traditional music. Side two and especially side four are very, very ambient. It's almost basically just sounds in the background. But if you listen to it real close, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. This is really, really, really excellent album. Although I will say that this is not for everybody. A lot of people would not like this album too much because it's so different. But it is definitely one worth checking out if you like a little stuff that's avant-garde. It is really good. Stratosphere. I have a vinyl copy. This perhaps is their most melodic album. It has four tracks that are, between like 8 and 12 minutes long, something like that. All of them are great. This does include a lot of instruments that you don't normally hear on a Tangerine Dream album, including such things as harmonica. All four of the tracks, well, three of the four tracks kind of start and end the same way. The first three tracks, Stratosphere, is a really rollicking kind of sequencer-driven track. Very, very good. Big Sleep in Search of Hades is a little more, I don't want to say downbeat, but much more serious. They're very good tracks. 3 a.m. at the border of the marsh at Okefenokee has a lot of bizarre kind of sounds that kind of imitate animals at a swamp at the beginning, and it's excellent. And Invisible Limits is also very good. They're all good tracks. This is a great album. Rubicon. I don't have that one on vinyl. Rubicon is one of those sidelong, two-part song that covers the entire album. Basically, Rubicon Part 1, Rubicon Part 2, and they're kind of similar in structure. It's kind of ambient, but it does have sequencer-driven parts to it. And if you like this album, you may want to try out Edgar Froese's solo album, Epsilon and Malaysian Pale, which is very similar in structure to this album. They're not very loud. I mean, they're a little more mellow, but both of these albums are excellent. Great album. And my number one, Phaedra. And it's also the one that's probably considered the most critically acclaimed of the Tangerine Dream albums. Side one, Phaedra, has become a phenomenon. This album is probably one of the strangest albums to go gold in several places. Phaedra is an outstanding experimental virgin to synthesizers and mellotrons and different things. Mysterious Sequence at the Strand of Nightmares, which is the first track on side 2, also very much is mellotron driven. Very cool. Movements of a Visionary, excellent. Sequence C, the last track, is pretty much mostly electronically enhanced flutes, and it's a pretty good way to close out the album. This is the one that I would suggest to anyone who's wanting to see what Tangerine Dream is all about. This is a great album. I didn't mention that the first track to have the classic lineup, which is Froese, Franke, and Bauman, was the album Zeit, the strange one. And that lineup, which is actually the cream of Tangerine Dream, stayed consistent on vinyl up to Encore, which came out in '77. So between '72 and '77, their albums all had that lineup. And the first soundtrack album, I believe, had the same lineup. Sorcerer and Thief are two soundtrack albums that are also pretty good. I just don't get into the soundtracks as much. They're much more disciplined, but they're both pretty decent albums. But anyway, that's my ranking of the early Tangerine Dream, which is everything they did from 1970 to about 1987, 88, and that's how I rank them. Thanks.